Hi, Jen, how are
Hello,
you?
hello. How are we all today?
Doing fine.
Guys,
Oh,
how are
good,
you?
good. Okay. It is almost 1 o'clock. People are still coming in, and we will let them keep joining. But in the meantime, for those early birds that have joined us early, as you know, hello and welcome. I am Radine O'Connor, the community manager at RDI Hub. And we are joined this week by Jennifer Dowling, the organizational psychologist, there's a title. I just added that in myself, and Steve Fleming, Voxxify founder and CEO. And we're going to have a conversation about change. And that is an important conversation to have. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I think it'll be a really interesting one. This is one that I've been looking forward to for a while. And so for those of you who are new to the Pivot series, this is your opportunity to connect with thought leaders and explore how you pivot and reinvent and innovate your business to survive and thrive. And people are always at the core of our business. So I think this is vitally important as a conversation. So the Pivot series is powered by RDI Hub, which is an environment for startups and corporates to come together and collaborate and to accelerate growth. And we are based in the southwest of Ireland. So we have space for startups and corporates who want great tech tools, who want a great network of mentors, access to investors, innovation programs. So if you're interested, drop me a line. I'll pop my email in the chat. In the meantime, welcome. I'm seeing some faces I know and some newbies. So hello, Pa, hello, and how are you? Lovely. And thanks, Adrian, for the little chat in the chat function. If you do have questions throughout the session, guys, there is a Q&A down the bottom. Feel free. I'm watching the Q&A in the background when the guys are talking, or put it in the chat either. So as I said at the start of this, we are having a conversation around change, and everyone in this room has experienced change we have been ready for, and change that we have not been ready for. And I think it's really important now because we're in certain times, we're gearing up for a return to work, which in itself is a change. So this conversation today is important. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the two of our guests today. Jennifer Dowling is an organizational psychologist, like I said, but she's also the director of a company called Train Remote. And Jennifer is a part-time lecturer in UCC. I often wonder sometimes when I'm reading these bios what I do with my own life. And then we're joined also by Steve Fleming, CEO and founder of employee experience startup Voxxify. He's former Dell digital workplace lead. And he told me just before we came on this call, he also represented Ireland as an athlete, both in the long jump. I can't remember the other one. I think it was the
400 meters.
400 meters.
One lap of the track.
Should have gone my gut there. So yeah, impressive bunch we're joined with today. So we're going to bring together the psychology of change and the change theory and the practice from an enterprise level. So I think it'll be an interesting one. So as always, I like to start off these sessions by hearing from the people in this room. And to do that, I just want to get a little sense of your experience with change and kind of your thoughts on change, really. And I think it'll be an interesting way to kick off this conversation. So my question to you guys today is a simple one. Without any prompts from me, what words come to mind when you think of change? So what I'm asking you to do is take out your phone. This is your phone. It's the weird hand thing. And go to menti.com. So MENTI.com, and use the code 79820 to answer the question, what words come to mind when you think of change? Oh, that's really interesting. Straight off the bat, growth and fear in the same sentence. Sorry, I'm just getting pinged here. Never mind. complexity, opportunity, people. People is going to be at the core of our conversation today. Technology, value. And that difficulty, challenge, fear comes up, but then you have on the same board enthusiasm, courage, so things that have potentially positive and negative connotations, all existing together. Processes. Growth, fear, opportunity. I think that's an interesting one because those three are coming out quite strongly. Probably fear at the moment is the biggest one. Opportunity, it's kind of faring there.
Yeah. Sitting between the two of them, between fear and opportunity, I guess, is uncertainty.
Yeah,
probably the main.
absolutely. I always love this part of the sessions because I get to hear what everyone else is thinking, which is really nice in this environment. Resistance, enthusiasm, improvement. Yeah, change. For me, I always associate change with improvement, but not necessarily. That's not necessarily always the case. Okay, that was really interesting, guys, and I'm going to stop it there. So, thumbs down, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over, without any further ado, to Jennifer Dowling, who will take us through the theory behind change and its effect on us.
Thanks, Radine. And thank you to the RDI for having us. I loved that Menti. It did a lot of my job for me in making the point that we all experience change very differently at an individual level. So hopefully that's a theme that's going to carry through my presentation. I'm going to bring us through just to a few slides for those of you who can see it. As Radine said, I am an organizational psychologist. Apparently I am the organizational psychologist, so thanks Radine for that. As organizational psychologists, we're interested in human behavior around work. I'm particularly interested in agile and flexible working. So I've worked with companies a lot over the last couple of weeks and months in transitioning to more remote and flexible working. So that's been really, really interesting. And I suppose I want to share with you today some of the theory around kind of change and human experience of change. And then it's really great to have Steve here as well today, who's going to talk about it from his experience at an enterprise level of change as well. But to kick off, I thought we might just do something a little bit different. I thought we might run through a little business simulation. So just to do something a little bit different from normal. So I'm going to ask you to walk through a little simulation with me. Okay, so just a bit of fun. But if you can just follow me just for a few minutes. So I'm going to ask you to walk through as key employee of a growing company that I have. Okay, so this company is called Smart Products Inc. You might have heard of us actually due to our best-selling product, which is the Smart Sock embedded with Bluetooth technology, which means you will never lose a sock again. So obviously this is a revolutionary new product, but we're going into our yearly shareholder meeting. So it's the end of the year, we're going into our shareholder meeting, and they really want us to talk about upcoming lines. So what's coming and what we're going to be bringing in new revenue around and what's going to engage our customers in 2021. So just to walk you through the line, our new line is, first of all, a flex and fitted trousers, which is a really innovative product that will go up and down 3 sizes with you. So you never need to buy new pants. Christmas time, you can eat all the turkey, and summertime, you'll still be bikini ready and you won't have to change your pants. The second product that we have is the Smart Messenger bag, again, built in anti-theft alarm. So hopefully you will never lose a bag again. So obviously we're really excited about these new products. But what we need is your help to create a 60-second pitch for our shareholders to get them equally excited about it. So what I need is a brief go-to-market pitch with a story of a customer of ours or a potential customer of ours using our new products. So we're looking for a kind of a scene. So where are they? Who's the customer? What's the situation? So again, I'm just going to ask you just for about 5 minutes to just start putting together a pitch, and we'll share some of them afterwards. But about 5 minutes, I'm going to go quiet for a few minutes and just ask you to start putting together a pitch around our 2 new products. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes for this, and I'm just going to go silent for a few minutes. Any questions? Stick them into chat. Okay, guys, I'm sorry just to interrupt you there. We just have I got an email from the shareholders. Sorry about this now, and I know you're all working on your pitch. But the shareholders have just got back to us, and I'm gonna go ahead and read you the email. So they've said that the go-to-market story pitch sounds cool, but they're thinking instead of a pitch that they want a business reason for the products. They particularly want to know what percentage total revenue these products are going to provide in the first year of market penetration. Okay, so I know you're in the middle of your pitches here, and I'm sorry about this, but I'm going to just ask you to ditch the pitch and come and maybe work for us around the business reasons for these products. Again, so you know the products, we're kind of under pressure here, so we have about a minute to do this. So again, if you could just start looking at the business reasons for the product and maybe make a stab at kind of what percentage revenue we might expect to get from these products in the first year. So again, thanks a million, guys, and I really appreciate this. But I'll come back to you in about a minute. Thanks. Okay, guys. Thanks for going through that with me. And you may say, why on earth did I make you go through that? But we'll unpack that as we go through. My first question, I guess, and I'm going to ask you to put this into chat, and maybe Radine, you can feed it back into me. But what was your reaction to that change? What was the impact for you personally? What was the impact to that change, for that change for you personally? And if you could just put a few words into chat, and Radine, I might get you to feed those back into me.
I was in the background. I'll kick everybody off. I was in the background looking at the request and realizing I did not have enough information to answer it, and then having that change. So Adrian has come back and said a little bit annoyed, which I think is natural, Adrian, which was he was just getting to the flow of his pitch. I think he really liked your sock idea and the flexi pants. Ruth came out and just got confused and annoyed, which is absolutely fair. Pa, I never thought shareholders would have a decision on a management issue. It's a fair point, Pa. Fair point. Kind of frustrated with the lines of communication, I guess. Okay. Oh, Aaron, yeah, frustrated with a quick change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something that's coming
through. Okay, guys, keep those coming through. Yeah, I'd barely grasped the first request before the second one came in. Yeah, difficult to ditch the material you'd already developed. Yeah, and create something completely new. Absolutely. Pa, I'm not sure. We haven't really worked out the intricacies of the product yet, but good question. Panic, yeah, absolutely. So thank you guys for your honesty. And I guess the next thing that I would like you to kind of maybe reflect on is, can you think of a change event that you've gone through maybe in your own workplace that maybe might relate to some of those feelings around kind of frustration, pressure, panic, not having fully got our head around something before being asked to change again. So again, just trying to think on your own, kind of, have you experienced those kind of feelings around change before? And many of us, I think, can probably relate to that. What I asked you to do was to change without giving you any really good reasons why I was asking you to change. I didn't give you any accommodations really in terms of time to actually get your head around change. I didn't give you any control over the change. And we all kind of know what it's like to work under that time pressure, which can become amplified then when change is involved as well. So just to look at some of the factors, and thank you again for taking part in that. Just bit of fun there with the simulation, but to look at some of the factors that impact change. So we can look at kind of tangible organizational factors that impact change. So things that we can all relate to in terms of kind of what's our strategy, what are our internal capabilities, who are our customers, what's the technology, the structure, and factors then from a tangible perspective around, personal factors around what are the job roles that people have, who has reporting authority to who, what kind of benefits, capabilities do people have, what location are people working from. We also have intangible factors that impact change. So things like the culture, the leadership, engagement, loyalty, trust. So intangible organizational factors that impact change. And finally, we have kind of personal intangible factors that impact change. So our commitment, our values, our history, our personality, all intangible factors that impact change. So again, I'm going to ask you to put into the chat function there, which of these quadrants kind of gets the most attention when as an organization we're considering change. So where does most of the effort, consideration, and talk, planning go into when we're talking about change at an organizational level? So again, if we can just kind of stick those into chat there. So tangible, personal, yeah, thanks Ian. Organizational, tangible, yeah. Top left, tangible organization, yeah. Top left, yeah. So usually when I ask this question, this is the answer that I get, is generally around kind of the tangible organization, personal factors that relate to change. And in one way, this is kind of the easier stuff, right? Because this kind of has more clarity. It can be harder to get a grip of the intangible factors that affect change. And these are kind of our organizational level culture, but also our personal level values, commitment, and kind of history with the organization and with change. And oftentimes when we focus on the tangible, personal, and organizational factors, we kind of have a lovely change curve like this, so if over the next period of time, X number of people adopt the change, we're going to have this lovely trajectory of change. And anybody who has experienced change, I think can relate to the fact that usually it's much more like this, and that's probably best case scenario, so we have a much more winding kind of experience of change than just that very clear path. And I think what's really important here is that there's hugely individual differences, factors that affect how we experience change. So if we think about change on a very individual level, and we think about it nearly from a nature-nurture perspective, we all experience change differently. And I guess that's something that we don't really want to hear when we're trying to put structure on change, but it's definitely the reality. At a nature level, each of us have different relationships with change. So if we think about it on from a personality measure around maybe openness to change. So some people are very high on openness to change naturally. And these are the kind of people that Daryl Mann was talking about last week. Anybody who was on that webinar, he was talking about innovators, adapters, change makers, very comfortable with change, will often seek change, look for change. But at the other end of that, often we have people who are less comfortable with change, who value predictability, structure, reliability. And for them, that's really important. And both are very necessary. And we all tend to fall somewhere on this. So there's our individual differences in relation to personality, and that affects how we experience change. And also then there's kind of a nurture level to it. So what's been our experience of change in the past? And some of us have had really positive experiences of change. And so we'll be quite open to change, and that'll affect our relationship with change and our the speed at which we adopt change. And some of us have had really negative experiences of change, and that'll lead to the other experience. So what I wanted to talk about in kind of taking into consideration that we all experience change differently is this idea of the change cycle. So it gives us some guidelines for the kind of stages that people can go through when they're experiencing change. And where our individual differences plays into this is the speed at which we go through this cycle. So for some people for whom change is very much sought and are very comfortable with change, they'll move through the change cycle very quickly. For others for whom change is more difficult, they may move through the change cycle at a slower speed and may even get stuck on certain elements or certain stages of the change cycle. So I've seen this very clearly over the last number of weeks and months as I've been supporting organizations with this transition to more remote and flexible working. But I thought it might be interesting to look at each stage and to maybe look at it through the COVID lens. So if we look at the blue line here, this blue line represents our energy as we move through the stages. Okay, so at the initial stage of denial, and many of us kind of can remember this when it was initially happening around COVID, there was this kind of air of maybe this is happening somewhere else. We don't really need to engage with this. There's an avoidance of dealing with things. And this can be a very natural reaction to initial change. And within organizations, we may also kind of have experienced this, and we need to go through this stage of denial. But what becomes really important at this stage is really good and consistent information and communication, and allowing people kind of a space to kind of go through this kind of denial stage. And I think what's really important is that people have time to get their heads around change, to socialize change in whatever way they need to, and work through this period of denial. Often we can see a dip in energy then as people kind of experience anger and frustration around the change. From the perspective of COVID, we might have heard people saying things like, we've been talking about a pandemic for years, why aren't we better prepared? So that real kind of tangible anger and frustration that we can also have experienced at organizational levels as we kind of go through change. And again, what's really important here is consistent clarity in the information that we're giving people and in the communication that people get, and that we give people space to kind of vent their concerns, but that we remain consistent in the information and communication that we're presenting. And even if we think about this kind of at a government level, when we were experiencing COVID, we all got to know Tony Holohan a whole lot better, and there was this very kind of clear and considered communication around the behaviors that we needed people to engage with to achieve the end goal, which was the flattening of the curve. So there was this social distancing, washing your hands, so very clear behaviors that people needed to engage with to achieve an end goal. So that moderated some of that anger and frustration that people were feeling. The next stage can be around kind of this feeling of being overwhelmed, of feeling somewhat helpless and depressed with the situation, of feeling like you have a lack of control. And oftentimes here we'll see kind of dips in energy, dips in productivity, a lot of apathy, people kind of feeling isolated and remote. And again, I suppose what's really important here for organizations is that we kind of acknowledge this, and that we allow people space to kind of share how they're feeling, be it with managers or be it with each other, and that we have kind of empathy and provide emotional support for people as they kind of, I suppose, grieve what was previous reality and start to accept what is anew. And I think that we've all probably experienced this at various ways and in various different times over the last couple of weeks and months, both in ourselves and probably seen it in other people as well. The final stages are around kind of bargaining and acceptance. So this is kind of where we slowly start to kind of emerge into a more optimistic space. Our energy starts to increase a little bit. We slowly start to kind of accept the change that's coming. Sometimes we can kind of see excitement and positivity start to emerge here. And again, as people start to accept a new reality, what's required here is really good guidance and direction on how we operate within this new reality. And again, things like from a COVID perspective, kind of the roadmaps around reopening, the HSA guidelines for workplaces. Again, clear guidance and direction on how people can operate within this new reality. And again, I suppose as organizations and as leaders, it's about really acknowledging people's efforts here, and kind of applying kind of a praise and appreciation for new behaviors that are being adopted, and maintaining that support as we go through the cycle. And I suppose it's to acknowledge that, as I said before, people will experience this at different speeds and in different ways, and we've experienced a period of change. We're likely to experience another period of change, and I suppose it's about trying to meet people where they're at with that change. Steve, I'm going to stop here for a minute, and I'm going to just throw it over to you, maybe just to kind of put some context around all this, maybe talk to your own experience, and your experience of kind of overseeing change within organizations. Okay.
Everything you're saying here resonates with all of my experience. So will I just share my slides here?
Yeah.
I'll just get it. So,
yeah, and we can leave some time at the end then for any kind of questions and discussion, if that's
fantastic. So give me a sec here as I just get my screen sharing ready. So as I'm just getting this ready, everything, as I said, is consistent with everything you've seen. And I've seen it kind of at large levels and small levels. So right now I'm in a startup. I don't seem to have the right to share my screen there, Jen, or Radine. Let me just see here. I think I'd be better with IT after all my my experience with it. All right, so can you see here? Oh. So my background really is in IT, but it's in corporate roles. So I've been through, RBS, Aviva, EMC, Dell. What was kind of interesting about EMC is that people used to joke that EMC stood for everything must change, or everybody moves constantly. In my experience, really the only constant in corporate world is change. Can you see which screen I'm sharing? Excuse me now. So the only constant really is change. And so what I've been doing really is helping enterprises manage change and manage through that change cycle that Jennifer talked about. So what I've discovered over the years is that the main problem with change, or one of the major problems with change, is what's called the experience gap. So there's a difference between the perception of management, what management thinks is going on, or what information management is able to get about what's going on, and what the reality is for employees, what people are feeling on the ground. This has been the case through, really major changes. So I've been through massive kind of M&A integration type projects. I've been through, I worked in RBS during the time when the financial crisis happened, a time when we were told not to wear our badges in the street for fear of being assaulted even by people we'd meet. And there was a real difference between what management was focused on, which is probably keeping the show on the road, and the fear that people were feeling on the ground. And in the word cloud earlier on, I think fear kind of was one of the bigger words in the middle of it. And it's really that gap in experience that's really important to close. And when I talk about a gap in experience, so this is a survey I'm running at the moment with a US technology company. Now this is focused around technology more than culture. And they wanted to do it around about the time of COVID, with everybody moving from office-based environments to home-based environments. And what's clear here on this is, even, if you think of IT versus the rest of the company, or back office functions versus front office functions, IT and the back office functions are, as far as they're concerned, everything is fine. Their experience is really good, and the green at the top. And then the rest of the company, the people who actually have to go and build product, sell product, deal with customers, their experience is dramatically different. And this was a big shock when it came to IT. So this is actually a very progressive company. It's a global company. They've got employees in about 35 countries. The CEO really wanted to find out what the experience was like. So she went on a tour before COVID to find out what people were feeling, but she struggled with gathering that information at scale. So we were happy to be able to give her that information. But again, the point of making here is the gap is very pronounced at a lot of companies between either what, IT in this case you're thinking versus what the doers are thinking, or what management are thinking versus what the employees are actually experiencing. Another way of putting it potentially is that there's a communication gap. And certainly in changes that I've been through, not having enough information, not knowing what management are thinking, not knowing what's around the corner was probably the biggest challenge. So there's things like what management hears from the employees is not necessarily what the employees are saying. And so there's a filter in the middle that needs to be broken down. So a process that I've put together and that I feel is important in closing the gap is to go through a few different stages. And I've broken it down as 4 kind of big stages here, which I think is important to do in any kind of a change, whether it's an IT change, whether it's a major kind of cultural change, whether it's even an environmental change. And the first thing really is to ask. You really have to go out and ask employees very carefully and actively invite as many different perspectives as you can, because most people don't think the way you think. And the only way to find out is to really go and ask them in a way where they feel comfortable and safe in giving an honest answer. The second part then is to listen. So once you get the answer in, so that you don't have that communication gap, listen very, very carefully to what people say. Now you have to do it in a way where you're listening to the sense of what people are saying, the emotion of what people are saying, but also to measure it if you can, so that you've got data. The reason you want the data is so that you can see where you are before the change, during the change, and after the change, and really identify areas where you really need to get involved. actually then, once you've listened to what people have had to say, once you've listened to what people are feeling, you can make positive changes that matter to the people. So the changes that you had planned might not be the changes that people need. So this is your opportunity to maybe pivot or change course, or add extra changes really to kind of help people navigate through the major change that's going on. And again, the focus here is people. Make sure you're attentive to what people are feeling and what they need. And then finally, sometimes what people forget is to actually communicate, to let people know what you're doing, to let people know, first of all, you've heard them. Secondly, you understand what they're saying. And then thirdly, you've made a change that you hope will improve their lives. And this is, I presented it here as a linear, straightforward process. It's actually a curve. It's actually a closed circuit process. You should do this repetitively over time, maybe quarterly, maybe twice a year, maybe once a year. But keep doing it, keep asking, keep listening, keep responding, and make sure you communicate. As an example of how this has actually worked, so this was a major Fortune 500 company with about 100,000 employees worldwide. So this is the process of surveying over about 2 years, where at the start, you can see on the left, the numbers are all red. People's experience was quite poor. Again, this is an IT context related to productivity tools. But you can see over progressive stages, by measuring, by looking at the data, by listening to what people were really saying, this company and the management here were able to affect positive change over the course of 2 years, where everything went from pretty much red across the board for these different roles to green across the board for these different roles. I think it's interesting to note as well, Jen, on the left, when you talk about the path to change not being straight, you know, this curve illustrates it. In each case, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. But over time, broadly speaking, it's all going in the right direction. Sometimes the challenge then is really, maybe it's not a communication gap, it's a time gap. How busy are you? So if you're going through change, you don't really have time to go and communicate, or so you think. But the employees need communication. They need your time. So how do you bridge that gap when this is what your world feels like? It feels like the world is on top of you. You've been hit by 100 different things all day long. You don't have time to go and listen to people. But I think if any of the charts, if any of the numbers, if anything I've shown you in the previous few slides is important, it's important to make the time to listen, because it's so critical to the culture and to getting people through the change. Be systematic about how you listen and use data where you can. This is particularly important for large companies. With small companies, I think you can go around and you can actually meet people and sit down with them and talk to them. But in a large company, you need some kind of systematic method to go and do that. And then finally, as I said, communicate often. Very often what I've seen in companies is that the management communicates once, they communicate twice, and employees after a while, they stop believing what they've been told. They need updates frequently, so communicate as often as you can. And you'll do better to over communicate than not to communicate at all. So that's really my experience of it. Again, you know, I suppose if there was a summary, change is constant, change is inevitable, and the only way really you can change successfully, if you're going to successfully change at all, is to make sure that you're communicating well and often with the people who are impacted by change. And I guess back to Jen, you know, how much
Back to Jen.
with you from a psychology point of view?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, Stephen. You have so much experience in this area, and one of the things that I loved that you said is that, you know, not everyone experiences change the same way as you do, you know, and actually sometimes in organizations, the place from whence change comes is often the people who are actually very comfortable with change, right? So, you know, our C-suite can often be very comfortable with, you know, organizational change, and also probably have time to process it in a little bit of a different way to maybe the people who were expecting to actually carry out that change. So I think that point around keeping your finger on the pulse and connecting in and communicating and listening to people, it's core to change. So, and the other point that I really like that you made is that, you know, change is continuous. You know, it's not just a once-off. It's not just like we have a change. It's something we have to build towards and work towards all the time, right? We're constantly trying to build our mindset around continuous change. So that's not something we just do once off. It's a continuous process. So I think that's also a really, really useful point to take.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions, you guys. And I have a couple of questions myself, I suppose, so I'm going to kick off selfishly. Trying to apply some of the theory to practice. Would, I suppose, Steve, you first, what would be that one insight that you wish you had known at the start of a transformation or a change journey at the time? What was that one insight you said, I would have liked to have known what that nugget before I started this?
I think it really is going to be that people can have very, very strong reactions to whatever you're doing. You know, very often I've been in a situation where you're introducing some new technology, you're introducing some new process or some new way of doing things. And I'm very kind of, I'm one of those people who loves change. I like to change all the time. I see it as an opportunity. But the first time we ever ran a survey, and this is at EMC, it was about 2016. And I remember IT managers crowded around the screen to see what the result was, and they fell off their chair when they saw it. They thought they were doing great. People didn't think they were doing great. And there was war for a while. But again, thinking back to Jen's change curve, that got them out of denial into rejection and got the curve moving. But it was that first thing where it's really not just communicating to the people impacted by change, but communicating to the leaders who have to make the change that they're going to get some bad news, and bad news is good, because at least you got out of denial. Unlike Cleopatra, you're not swimming in denial, and actually then you're starting to move forward because you've got some honesty.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I remember when I was in Mondelez, we were going through that change journey as well, you know, and we're going from Cadbury's to Kraft to Mondelez, and bringing everyone on that journey can be such a difficult thing because people can be quite ingrained in the way they do things and their approach to work. And it was 2 years of, you know, before they got it right, before they had regular communication and really high levels of engagement, so that everybody felt that they were being brought on that journey, and that journey was not just presented to them. Mm-hmm. And that was really important. That level of engagement, that level of like group engagement, that, and even I think from a survey point of view, being asked your opinion and being listened to is really, really important.
Just on that as well, Radine, I think both of what you're saying actually, it's giving people that sense of control, right? You know, because sometimes I think change gets, you know, put on us without any sense of control over it. And that's when we fall into that, you know, feeling of depression and helplessness. And, you know, so how do we give people that sense of control over their situation? Even, you know, the last couple of weeks and months, lots of people transitioning into remote work, you know, or so where they've had to maybe work from home, but how they do that and maybe the times at which they do that is given to them. So there's a sense of control around my environment. You know, I have no control over macro level changes, but I have control over micro level changes, and that can really increase my engagement with the change and my speed at which I can kind of move through that change curve. So
yeah, I think Radine, your point of bringing people with you on the journey, make people part of the change, part of the decision, and include them. I think that's probably the most important thing there. Instead of having change foisted on you, you've got some kind of control, because I think a lot of the fear and uncertainty comes from, I have no control now over my future. You might have a family, you might have a mortgage, you might have all these different things. And if your job is suddenly going to change, your circumstances are going to change, that can be very, very scary for people.
Mm. Yeah, actually, there's a question here. How do you mitigate, and just answer it like, how do you mitigate strong reactions to change? And that's something I think everyone has dealt with. Yeah. Any tips?
My feeling would be, you can't mitigate the reaction, the initial reaction. People are going to react. And to Jen's point, how you are is how you are. How you react to something is how you're going to react. But I think you should be kind of ready to get that kind of very, very strong reaction. But I think it's, first of all, accept that really, really strong reaction, and then try and understand what's underneath it and communicate back to say, yeah, I know you're feeling bad about this, you're feeling scared. Let's talk about it. That'll be my perspective on it. I don't know about you, Jen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, it's meeting people where they're at, right? You know, and understanding that we're all going to be at different places with it, and then applying that empathy to where people are at and allowing them to experience that reaction that they may have. But I think that's really, really important is that piece around empathy, listening to what they have to say and giving them space to move through those emotions. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question here from Gillian. Gillian, I'm going to see if you're willing to go up and ask the question yourself.
Gillian?
How's it going?
Hey,
Good
Gillian.
to see you. Sure, I'm happy to voice the question. So change often requires training, and the training requires time. And from my experiences over the last few years, unless management actively carves out time for training, the day-to-day workload, the backlog always takes priority, even with the best will in the world. And you know, you've got your individual development plan, you know which courses to take, you carve out 3 hours in your calendar to get one of those done, and lo and behold, the day comes around and there's too much of the backlog. And again, it gets kicked out and kicked out. So unless management takes this time and says, now everybody here, carve out this time, you are not to be setting up meetings in here, you are not to be doing anything, this is dedicated to learning. Would love your thoughts on that.
So Gillian, having worked over in ovens as well, I know exactly how it can be. There's not enough hours in the day to do your job, never mind learn how to do your job. But I think it's, you know, from my experience of wherever I've been, unless people are actually given the time, unless management carves out the time for people to go and do the training and make it pretty much mandatory, I think you're right. It's always going to lag behind. So I think it's one of those hard decisions. I think to Dad's credit, they have taken time to do some of the stuff, like some of the mark training I remember, where first of all the execs had to do it and then everybody had to do it. So it became kind of culturally the right thing to do, I guess. So maybe it's a question of aligning your culture with management support to say, you know, everybody else is taking time out to train and develop. So it's okay actually. And it is so important that it's worth taking the time for.
Yeah, it's a good point, Steve, that you mentioned the word mandatory, and that's often a word people shy away from. They don't want to make the training mandatory. They say, you know, it's highly recommended and all these other phrases, but at the end of the day, it's only when you make it mandatory that people will carve out the time. Okay, it might be, you know, as the date approaches for the deadline, but it gets carved out and it gets done.
Yeah. And I think one point around that as well is, you know, if we want change and we need behaviors that need to be trained, for, you know, we need to engage in training around it. We're sending mixed messages then if we don't create the time for people to engage in that training. So if as management we want change and we need X behavioral changes, we need to create the space and time. Otherwise we're giving kind of mixed messages to the change.
Yeah, agreed. Cool.
I totally agree with you, Gillian. Yeah.
And maybe there's another point I think that might kind of apply to it, which is prioritization is something most people are pretty bad at. And helping people prioritize. Maybe it's not all the training, maybe it's half the training, but what's the most important piece of training that's going to make the biggest impact in your day? Maybe that's kind of where an extra bit of discipline around that could be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. If they're not, you know, if certain management is not prepared to use the mandatory word, then helping people prioritize it might be the key there. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Gillian. Timothy, you have a question. If you're happy to talk, let me know and come on away up. Timothy, do you want to? You're on mute. Do you want to unmute yourself, Tim? No worries if not.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes. Hiya. How you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Good.
That's good. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the presentation. It was great. I was just wondering, for unplanned and unexpected change, very much like what we've seen with COVID-19, I'm just wondering if it is always the same approach or same strategy and tactics that you use for these kind of unplanned changes that come upon you very quick without much time to plan them, versus ones where you maybe have known of a change and you've known it's coming for maybe 6 or 12 months and you've had time to dream up a strategy to get people to engage and buy into it. Is it always the same approach, or does it vary versus planned versus unplanned?
I can take that first, if that's
Yeah.
okay. I suppose like the things like the change curve and some of the recommendations, they kind of offer a model for us to use be it changed or unplanned change. So I think that it can be useful even in something like an unplanned change to refer to that in terms of how people are going to process it. And I think the only other point that I'd make about that is coming back to that initial point around kind of the mindset, the culture around change. So whether it's unplanned or planned, then if we're working constantly towards building a change mindset within our team or our organization, then unplanned change doesn't have the same impact. So I think it's something we need to kind of work on all the time. And part of that is kind of back to you, Steve, in terms of relation to communication and staying on the pulse of how people are feeling about things as well.
Well, I think, and I think there might be two parts to that. I think creating a change muscle in people so that they're used to constant small amounts of change, and when a big change happens, they're probably better prepared for it, potentially. And I think secondly, then being ready to move fast. So if a big change happens all of a sudden out of the blue, then at least be ready to go and find out where people are, see where people are at. So at least react to it quickly and react to it in a kind of an open and empathetic way. I think that's probably the best. But I guess the ideal situation, Jennifer, is make people more change friendly, get people in a position where they're seeing so much change all the time. Not so much that they're exhausted, but enough that they develop a muscle for it in the same way that you would if you're an athlete.
And it's a bit like confidence, isn't it? When we've experienced change and that's been positive, or we have actually adapted, we build up efficacy around our ability to change. And it's something that I saw a lot over the last couple of weeks and months. There was, nearly, a kind of a huge amount of efficacy built in people's ability to actually adapt to the changes they've had to adapt to, and there's something to build on there, so we have, seen massive change, we have adapted, so there's confidence in that too, and how can we bring that going forward, and constantly building that as well is important, I think. So
yeah, and it feels to me like the simulation you did at the start of this, it's a bit like a fire drill. Running change simulation drills periodically might be useful in terms of building that muscle.
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm muted.
Thanks, Tim.
Sorry, thanks, Tim. And I want to have one more question before we wrap, because I'm conscious of time. So, Niamh, if you are happy to answer live, I'm just okay. Now, so Niamh's question, if you want to unmute yourself there. No, that doesn't seem to be working. That's okay. Niamh, I'm going to ask a question for you, and if you want to come in and chime in at any stage, just shout at me. So, Niamh's question was, if change is going ahead regardless of main stakeholders' opinions, e.g. salespeople asked to sell an early adopter product, how do you get buy-in?
That's a tough question. I don't know. I'm gonna take it back to communication and empathy. You get buy-in by understanding where people are coming from, I guess, and seeing what their fears are and what their motivations are. So I guess it's just understanding where the stakeholders are coming from, understanding what challenges they might have with this enforced change. And, I suppose if you're really going to push buy-in, you represent it in terms of, terms that they're familiar with or that they understand. But it's probably matching the change to what people, what people want, what people are motivated around, be my feeling. But kind of
and just, it'll be interesting to get your ideas or thoughts on motivations and incentives in that situation, and where do they play in that?
Again, I think a lot of people work, they respond to incentives. You have to make sure the incentives are correct. An example of an incentive in a slightly different vein was, I'm trying to get a lot of, high response rate on a survey I'm sending out at the moment. And the CIO said, well, how about if we give people prizes? We have a raffle, and if you complete the survey, you get a prize. So that's a strong incentive to get people to take the survey. But on the other hand, science shows that if you give people a prize for taking a survey, you'll skew the results towards the positive because they're happy to get the prize. So it's a bad incentive in that point of view. So I think matching the incentive to the motivations of the stakeholders and also to your desired outcome is probably what you should do there. But I think it's one of the more difficult things around is, you know, particularly with salespeople, trying to get the right incentives to them so that they sell the product that's going to drive the company on, rather than sell the product that's going to get them a new car at Christmas.
Always a difficult one to muster. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap it there. I know we still have questions, but I'm conscious of everybody's time. I want to take 2 minutes to say thank you to our 2 guests today, Jennifer Dowling and Steve Fleming. You are a mind of information, and it's a session that I took an awful lot out of myself. Next week, we are going to have Ken Finnegan with us, who is CEO of Tangent and ex-chief technologist at IDA. He's going to talk about the top trends and do kind of a deep dive into the trends that are shaping our future. Talk about the baby steps approach to innovation, which I think will be an interesting one, and kind of AI as an organizational transformation and pathways to implementing that, rather than kind of a project, which is kind of how it's being viewed in a lot of organizations at the moment. I want to take a minute just to thank everybody that took the time today to join us. We're very grateful for you and hope you took a lot out of it. And we hope to see you all again next week. And again, thank you to my 2 guest speakers. I'm going to pop the next week's session in the chat functions. If anyone wants it, it is there. And if anyone wants to get in contact with either Steve or Jen, please feel free to drop me a line. I don't have your emails right here, but I can pop it in a follow-up email to everybody. And that's my email address if anyone has any questions.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Guys.
See you all next week.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye.